Hi, my name's Ryan Rey. I'm the music theory, piano, and logic instructor here at Pyramind. And in this breakdown, I'm going to be looking at the Walking Dead theme, which is composed by Bear McCreary. And there's 3 points that I'm going to be looking at in this theme. I'm going to be looking at the harmony, the texture, and instrumentation of this thing. Those are kind of like the 3 essential elements here that really give the character and mood to this really awesome theme. So first, looking at the harmony, it's essentially just 3 chords, 3 minor chords. It's G minor, E flat minor, and C minor. So the interesting thing about these 3 chords is they don't quite fit into a minor scale. Like, it's not really C minor or G minor. But what's cool about it is the 3 chords do outline the chord tones of a C minor chord, right? G, E flat, and C. Those are the 3 notes that give us a C minor chord. So it's really like these planing minor chords, which give it this sort of eerie quality. I remember first hearing this theme, and by the time that the second chord hit, I was kind of like, had this interesting feel because it wasn't expected at all, and it really, I think, fits the mood of this piece. So it's really just, rather than major chords, we're playing with minor chords, and it keeps this sort of dark sound throughout. Now, what makes these 3 chords more interesting is the texture of the music itself. It's not just block chords like I showed you a moment ago, where I had G minor, E flat minor, and C minor. Instead, we get more of a melodic arrangement of this, where the melody itself kind of outlines the harmony. So instead of just playing a G minor triad in a block, root position shape, we get more of the notes spread out, so they're like this. And really the musical line goes. That kind of deal. So when the theme starts out, the texture of the music is playing this melody in a monophonic texture, as it's known. Monophonic just means that everything is playing essentially the same notes. And with a couple of exceptions of some of the instruments holding a low G, the rest of them are kind of moving through this melodic line almost in unison or in octaves, and giving this unified movement, which is that monophonic sound. And this happens in the opening portion with the G minor chord. Then as it moves into the E flat minor, it actually becomes polyphonic, meaning that there are multiple independent lines moving. And so each player is starting to take on its own unique line rather than playing in unison with the other instruments. And one of the interesting results that we get from these 2 contrasting textures is when you have multiple players playing in unison, in a monophonic type of texture, it feels a more perceivably louder because they're all unified. You're taking one sound and you're adding it to it and then adding to it, so it ends up being more of a volume increase and a more intense effect of that one musical line. With polyphonic textures, what ends up happening is you'll have a thicker sound or a thicker wall of notes, but it's not going to be necessarily louder because each individual line has its own independence and is moving on its own. So you get these 2 contrasting feels. You get this unified monophonic texture, which is kind of perceivably louder. You get the polyphonic sound, which is more spread and independent. And then what the composer does is starts off the theme very quiet, using this monophonic sound. So you have a louder unified effect, but presented really quiet. And then as it starts to grow and crescendo, it then changes to the next chord and spreads into a polyphonic texture. And so this is also amplified by making it a little bit louder. The dynamics are louder. So what you end up having is this gradual increase, this feeling of increased energy, but we don't really get an increase in volume. It's a really clever way to use texture as a way to increase energy without increasing volume. So here's what that sounds like in the opening. And I'm going to start it from bar 5. So if we have a look at those individual notes, we can see the first section here. Where they're all playing in this more monophonic texture. So then when we get to the E flat minor chord and we look at that texture, we can see that when I highlight all of these strings, we get this much more dense looking combination compared to what we had before, where it was all in unison. If I look at the individual lines themselves, the individual instruments, we can see that the first violins are playing a portion of the melody minus the starting note of the phrase. The violin twos are playing another portion of it that's creating a different composite. The violas are doing more of a scalar line where they're just kind of moving up and down. Cellos are also doing the full melody this time, and basses are just playing the low notes here. So when you put it all together, you end up with this interesting, thicker texture of polyphony rather than monophony, or the monophonic texture. When you get into C minor, it remains polyphonic. The lines are more or less the same. The violins play the full phrase of the melody, it looks like. Second violins are playing more of a scalar melody like the violas did, and the violas are picking up the melody, so are the cellos. So it kind of changes, which is interesting. It's not just the same polyphonic texture, it's kind of evolving and changing across the instruments, which gives us something interesting to listen to as it changes. Then by the time they come back to the G minor chord near the end, they're back at this monophonic texture, and there's also a significant drop in volume as well. So again, it's these dueling monophonic and polyphonic textures which give this really interesting effect within the music. And the final element is instrumentation. So I've already looked at a couple of instruments here, but the main thing to notice is that this ensemble is mostly a small string ensemble. There's a little bit of other stuff in here like some bass, guitar, percussion. Those are the things to kind of fill out the space to give it more depth to this theme. But it's really a small string ensemble, just a couple of players, as opposed to a full orchestra, which is very typical in a pretty big theme of this style. So what's really interesting about this choice is that with a smaller ensemble, you actually have more opportunity to hear the individual players themselves, as opposed to a larger ensemble like an orchestra, where each instrument or each section ends up feeling much more like a unified, larger force. So the difference is you often hear large ensembles or orchestral music being these really big, epic themes. They're often just a big, massive sound, and they feel like a very unified thing, which is going to give you that huge, epic sound. With smaller ensembles, it's much more intimate, and you have an opportunity to hear the individual voices themselves, or the individual instruments. And because of that, you can get a different level of energy from them. If we were to play the same theme or these same parts in a full orchestra, I think it would sound epic and huge, but it may not have the same intensity because of the forces involved. With these smaller ensembles, what you end up with is focus on the player playing these really fast lines. You can almost sense the intensity and vigorousness of playing these tremolo strings, like as fast as they can. There's a really interesting video on YouTube on Bear McCreary's channel where he talks about how he composes this theme, which is a really interesting one to check out, and you can see a little bit of his insight on why he selected a smaller group of instruments as opposed to something else. Part of it's film history and theme history, but I think it really fits with this type of show because we get a much more tense kind of feel within the music because we're hearing these individual lines. They're very agitated and fast. And it just kind of goes along with the mood of the show, which is also very tense from episode to episode. So that's it for the Walking Dead theme breakdown. Let us know what you thought down in the comments. Are you interested in seeing more theme songs, movie themes, TV themes, things like that? Or maybe from the same composers? Are there some that are interesting to you? There's always fascinating things to look at in relation to the theme music versus something like the music within a show or a movie. Sometimes those are different. The theme can be its own character while the remaining music is quite different. So let us know what you think, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.